Hello, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what is making headlines with the Executive Director of the Youth Endowment Fund, John Yates, and Editor-in-Chief of nationalworld.com, Nancy Fielder. Thanks both for being with us. Let's see what is on some of those front pages. We'll start with The Observer, which reports on the Royal Navy's role in supplying aid to Gaza, as the Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, warns people trapped in the territory are on the brink of famine. The Sunday Times leads with Lord Cameron saying Britain's support for Israel is not unconditional, raising the pressure on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu following the killing of 7 aid workers last week. The Mail on Sunday claims an investigation by the paper has blown apart Angela Rayner's claims to have not broken any rules over her property dealings. The Sunday Telegraph leads with 2 former defence ministers warning Britain has failed to prepare itself for war in what the paper says is a wake-up call for the government. Westminster could have been at risk in the sexting scandal for up to a year. That's according to the Sunday People. The Sunday Mirror claims Coronation Street bosses are slashing the number of stars in storylines as ITV looks to save money, meaning cast members fear they could be axed. The Sun on Sunday reports that the home of Newcastle United striker Alexander Isak has been targeted by thieves. And to remind you, by scanning the QR code you see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch along with us. Well, tonight we're joined by John Yates and Nancy Fielder. John and Nancy, thanks both for being with us. I hope you had a lovely Saturday. Let's crack straight on, and we're going to get into it with The Observer on the front page. And John, let's start with you on this. This is David Cameron warning of famine as the Navy is sending a ship to help bring aid in.
I mean, the bad news just keeps coming from Gaza. So we're at a situation now where USAID, the biggest aid provider that the United States government funds, has said that we're facing malnutrition, quote, unprecedented in modern history. And so the story here is that Lord Cameron, Foreign Secretary, is announcing that the Royal Navy is moving to send a large vessel over to play a part in trying to get aid into Gaza. I mean, we're sitting here just days after the murder of 3 British aid workers in what can only be described as a complete tragedy. But it also raises huge questions about what seems to be going wrong. Those of us who are very supportive of Israel's right to defence, a lot seems to be going wrong in that war. And I think the British government, quite rightly, are trying to work out how can we get aid in. The big proposal is, can we build a pier off the side of Gaza and bring the food in by ship? The Americans have said they're going to do it. I do worry a little bit that we're getting distracted, though. This pier is going to take some time to build. People are starving right now. The Israeli government is clearly in a very fragile state. The Prime Minister, Netanyahu, was struggling to run the government before the terrible terrorist attacks happened on October the 7th, and he's struggling to keep his coalition together now, and the war appears not to be leading to much success at present, but we're seeing horrendous loss of life. So I think that the question really is for the government, how can we and the Americans put some pressure on to try and help, in my view, the Israeli government take some decisions that might be in the long run best interest of Israel, which is to try and find a way to de-escalate the situation. And that's the big question here.
And actually, they did say towards the end of last week they're going to open Erez crossing in the north and Kerem Shalom, which should allow more aid in. As yet, those crossings have not still been opened. There are still aid vehicles waiting to get in. But I guess every example of this, of new maritime routes, airdrops, is an example of how there's a failure to get aid in the easiest way, by road.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole thing is a complete disaster, and the worst thing is, like you said, they're saying it could be the worst ever. This is entirely human-created, and it could be eased. I'm not saying Israel could instantly stop it, but this could be eased and this could be dealt with. These people do not need to be starving to death. And we've got to remember, it was absolute tragedy that aid workers lost their lives last week, and they were obviously the salt of the earth, risked everything to help other people. 30,000 people have died in Palestine through this war, and lots of them were children. Lots of them were completely unconnected to any attack. It was an absolutely evil attack on Israel, but people are dying, and it is unnecessary, and the pressure needs to be stepped up because it's just wrong, and it's taken a very long time It's taken actually the death of British people, let's be honest, for suddenly Britain to look like they're really trying to help.
I think what we mustn't lose in any of this story as we talk about it is just the personal horror that's involved. And I think for many of us who have connections or friends or family who are Jewish, we look at this story and we see a horrendous experience that occurred on October the 7th, reminding us of many previous horrors. For those of us who are friends and family who are Arab or Palestinian, we see the horrors of the deaths. And I think what we see in the murder of these 3 aid workers, it's worth just very briefly saying what happened. The drone that was being used by the Israelis saw a person, it would appear, with a bag and thought it was a gun. And as a result, an attack was fired on one a car of completely innocent aid workers, who then, some of whom fled to another car, which was then attacked, who fled to another car that was then attacked. I think the point is not to focus so much on one example, but to say that is what war is like. War is full of these horrible, horrible moments of just evil barbarity, and it's very difficult to know what Israel could do but to attack and try and get back the hostages, but we have to somehow de-escalate the situation, because the worst thing would be if we continue to see this loss of life and we also see a loss of faith and relationship in the State of Israel, which is ultimately bad for Israel and bad for the Palestinians.
Well, this is the point, isn't it, on the front of the Sunday Times. We can turn to that paper now, and this is David Cameron, who's written an op-ed in the Times tomorrow, talking about British support for Israel. And this is obviously not a headline that you would expect at this stage in a war that Israel was fighting, that support for the nation is not unconditional, and that sort of speaks to the stage that we find ourselves at, where the actions of the IDF, in many respects, are losing the support of stalwart allies like the UK and the US.
Yeah, I mean, if you remember right at the beginning, after that absolutely horrific attack, it was unconditional, and it didn't seem like anybody cared what happened to people in Gaza at all. And now it's 6 months later, and it feels like a long 6 months to me. So imagine what that's felt like for people living in Gaza, if they're still alive, because as we know, so many of them are dead. It has finally started to change. And we need negotiations, don't we? We need people who can put a bit of pressure on. And it does seem like those in power in Israel, the only pressure will be that they're not ready to negotiate. It doesn't feel like he will ever negotiate. It feels like it will be, we're not supporting you, we're going to withdraw. And whether even that will bring him to the table to make a difference, because it feels like he's trapped in, it feels a little bit like he's a loose cannon. And can he even be persuaded by America?
Well, that is the question, isn't it? If they're losing support from allies, whether or not that does change opinions.
Yeah.
I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu has heard this rhetoric, I'm sure, in private before this point and hasn't changed tack. It's now public. Is he going to change tack now?
I don't think he is going to change tack. I think the question is whether the tack has changed for him. You know, Netanyahu is not the only person who's ever led Israel. He's led Israel for an incredibly long time, but he's probably not the man who's going to lead Israel, I think, for much longer. An election is due. The question is when it comes. I think what the US want to happen is an election, and they would like to see a man, Benny Gantz, probably become the leader of Israel. Yep. And it's clear that Gantz, who was effectively leading the opposition party to Netanyahu until they formed this war coalition, is saying that he's quite up for leading the country and for seeing some sort of change happen. And I think that's the big politics
in September,
here.
Actually, that Benny Gantz has said that he would like to see an election come in September. And we know that before this war began, Benjamin Netanyahu was in a precarious position with regular protests on the streets against his rule.
Absolutely. And for President Biden to have a meeting with Netanyahu and describe it as businesslike and then say he is calling for a ceasefire, I mean, this is not quite unprecedented. We need to remember Ronald Reagan, actually, in 1981, said, I'm not going to sell any arms to Israel until they sort out what's going on in the Golan Heights. The US has done this before. It's put pressure on Israel to say, I think you're actually moving in the wrong direction here. And it's sometimes the way to be a friend to a nation you're friends with is to say some tough things. Yep. And it's now time to privately and publicly start to say things need to change. And we probably need to see a change of leadership in Israel.
Although there's also an American election, and that could change everything.
It could indeed. All right, let's skip on to the Mail on Sunday now, guys, if you can, on your stack there. And this is the story about the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner. And the Mail, I mean, being very clear as to how they see the story. The Labour Party and Angela Rayner herself denying that this is the case. But this story continues to have life to it, doesn't it, John?
Yeah, it does. It does, and I feel like it's got quite a while left to run. I mean, this story fundamentally comes down to: has she paid her taxes? Yeah. And it comes down to a particular tax called capital gains tax. And I think I'd say, if you think you understand capital gains tax, you don't understand capital gains tax. This is a fiendishly complicated piece of tax. Now, the mistake that she's probably made probably means she may have underpaid her taxes by £1,000. So just to put this in perspective, if we say that some people during the PPE debacle made about 60 million people, you can work out who I might be referring to, this is 1/6,000th of that amount. Now, a lot of people will say, I don't care about the amount, she's done the wrong thing. I would just say it is quite an easy mistake to make. If she hadn't been married, so her and her then husband owned 2 houses, they got married, at that point, she has to start paying tax. If she'd never got married, she never had to pay the tax. It really is quite fine details. The trouble is, I think there's going to be increasing evidence that she didn't declare this house as the main residence, which is what she should have done privately to the tax office. If she hasn't done that, the question is, where was she actually living? Yep. And I think there's going to be increasing little bits of evidence suggesting that she's done this wrong. What I wish she'd done, I really like Angela Rayner. I think she's someone who speaks her mind, and I think we need more people like that in politics. I wish 6 weeks ago she'd said, it's a complicated tax. I may have made a mistake. I'm going to get some advice. If I made a mistake, I'll pay it off.
I mean, she has maintained all this week that she's done nothing wrong. She's taken independent tax advice that she had done nothing wrong, and she maintains that. But as we've said, Nancy, I guess, with the Mail, with this splash today, with the photographs they have unearthed, there is still that question, and people will still be asking Angela Rayner, which she doesn't have to do at all, to publish her tax affairs to clear all of this up.
Yeah, I mean, the Mail and the Conservative supporting papers are not going to let this go. No. This is just going to run and run. How she deals with it will be a really interesting question. But I'm not even convinced that this particularly moves it on, this story. There are tweets of her saying, I'm home. I get back to Sheffield train station and tweet, I'm home. I don't live on a platform all of the time. And I think they are literally chasing this because maybe they haven't got anything worse on her. Maybe she didn't go to Eton. Maybe she understands because she once lived in a council house, because she had a child very young, because she didn't go through all the privileges in life. And maybe that's what we need, some leaders who understand real people.
I think
quick thought.
The problem is, if she's proved to have got this wrong and she doesn't pay the tax, it's just going to hang around the Labour Party's neck. And I think when we've got a leader who says it's all about integrity...
Because she says she's taken the advice and she's been advised that she has done nothing wrong, so we'll see how...
Absolutely.
The next...
We certainly will.
There's going to be another couple of feet to drop on this one, I think. All right, Nancy, John, thanks very much for that. Well, there's plenty more to come, and we'll be talking about this story in the Sunday Times as Harry York has written about being targeted as part of the Westminster honeytrap. We'll discuss what he had to say next. Well, you are watching the press preview, and with me are John Yates and Nancy Fielder. John, Nancy, thanks for sticking around. Let's get into the second half of the paper review, and we'll start with this story that's on the front of the Sunday People and on the Sunday Times. It's about what they're calling the honeytrap of Westminster and this sexting scandal that has enveloped William Bragg and some other Conservative MPs. Nancy, it's a reporter for The Times who says that he was also targeted.
That's right. So the People's line is that it could have been going on for a year, targeting lots and lots of different people. And the deputy political editor in The Times says he had exactly the same thing happen to him. Message popped up on his phone, pretending that it was somebody he'd known in the past, getting a bit flirty, saying they'd been flirty before. And he panicked and he realised he didn't know this person, thought this is probably a scam, and did nothing more about it, which you might think the people in charge of leading the country will be sensibly doing, all of them. I have absolutely no sympathy for grown adults who are in positions of power who fall for this kind of thing. It's the sort of stuff we warn our children, quite young children these days, about. And here they go. It's terrible they've been targeted, but it's even worse that they've fallen for it.
Yeah. Well, and what do you make of it, John? I mean, it's not just that they're sending sort of messages back, they're sending intimate body part pictures as well.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to this story, actually. So, first of all, I have a lot more sympathy on this than Nancy does. I think there's a story here about the psychological pressure that are on people who are members of Parliament. Yep. Because this is a mad thing to do. But I think we just need to understand how lonely and depressive and full of anxiety your life can be as a Member of Parliament these days, and someone getting in touch, forming a connection. I think that there is something there about what is going on with the life around these people that they were drawn into this. The second is, what's going on with the fact that obviously these apps are now things that our children have en masse. So if adults are falling for this, we need to worry much more about our children.
Yep.
There's a massive movement growing about should children under 16 have social media, which I have colossal sympathy and support for. But I think the third thing is here, there's a story on the Telegraph about we need much more money spent on the regular armed forces and so on and so forth. Well, actually, part of the reason we don't spend so much on the regular armed forces is because we're worried about cyber.
Yep.
And this story underlines that. Actually, if someone can get into an MP and have blackmailable material on them, such that they're giving out numbers of other MPs, that's a huge security risk.
Yeah.
And that's the story we probably should be most worried about here. What are we investing to keep our country safe from this sort of...
It's not huge cyber defences to stop you texting back on a WhatsApp, is it? This is just basic compliance. Like, if you've got your device, be very careful about who you're messaging back on it.
Don't send naked pictures to strangers. It's not rocket science.
I agree, but the safety of our security is only as strong as its weakest link. And when it comes to us being connected digitally, actually the weak link is almost everywhere. So the question is, what's the next backup? So a person gives out a number, they start then passing on information. Who's spotting it? How are we I mean, I pray nightly for our security forces at the moment, because this is becoming really difficult work. And I think this story just gives us a little glimpse of how vulnerable we could be. We don't know who was behind this.
But let's not forget our politicians deleted accidentally, lost all their WhatsApps, they dropped their phones. They're just really bad at technology. Maybe we should get some politicians in who kind of understand how the 21st century works.
The fallibility of human nature continues to be the case. And I think we should worry, firstly, about how do we keep us all safe.
I think Nancy's point is that some human beings seem more fallible than others.
Maybe that's true.
All right, let's have a quick look at the Sunday Mirror. And this is one that would have some of my family members quite upset, the Corrie cast of Living Crisis. I haven't read the whole detail, Nancy, but you're telling me that it's all about those streamers again.
It is, and this is a bit of a cliffhanger, because what they're saying is the storylines will involve less characters because they don't think they can afford them, and some of the main characters may actually be cut, and the actors are worrying for their jobs, which is the worst cliffhanger for anybody, because who will die, what terrible things are going to happen at the Rover's return, and... Actually, it's all the fault of Netflix, because they say not as many people are watching, they're not getting as much income, and so it's always the next generation's fault. These pesky people who subscribe to other channels.
It is. I mean, last thought from you on this.
I mean, we could have some amazing storylines, couldn't we? Think how many creative ways we could kill off hundreds of amazing characters.
Didn't a plane crash into...
Emmerdale's plane crash. That's what we need back again.
From a while ago. But it will be a shame if some of these beloved soaps are lost to the streamers. They've been going for many, many years. And as I said, people in my family will be very upset if they are lost. Right, John, Nancy, thanks both.